Hello everyone, Assalamu alaikum. I'm Dr. Imtazik Hassan, right now working as a research associate, University of Liverpool, and at the same time, an executive committee member of Public Health Foundation Bangladesh. We are very happy to announce that today we are going to organize a session on manuscript writing for publication. We have a very special guest. So before introducing the guest, I want to tell you a little bit who are behind this excellent initiative to help our young researchers and support in manuscript writing. I definitely want to start with McWeadon Education. And I think I want to quote from the website. They say, we do not use the factory model to deliver mass online education. Rather, we are very careful about the differences between the closed system of traditional instruction, which takes place within the confines of a classroom, and the open system of distance education, which extends the boundaries of learning, providing opportunities, options for learners in terms of what, when, where, and how they can learn. Definitely, I want to thank Dr. Bojul Khan for initiating this excellent platform and a flexible model of learning for a global audience within a very affordable cost. McWeadon provides workshops and online courses in various disciplines, and I want to request you to check the website McWeadon.com. The second institute organizations I want to acknowledge today is Faith Bangladesh. Faith Bangladesh stands for Foundation for Advancement of Innovations in Technology and Health, which is a registered non-for-profit organization based in Bangladesh, which envisions a planet where people living in resource-poor communities will enjoy advancement of innovations relating to health and technology. I think the most fascinating thing about Faith is they have three excellent core values: integrity, creativity, and excellence. Faith is providing health-related services specifically stressing on advanced innovative technologies, and at the same time, they're offering education and training and some excellent health research works throughout the year. So definitely, I would request you to check Faith Bangladesh, which is www.faithbangladesh.org, to know more about the diverse activities of Faith. The third organization, which I belong to, Public Health Foundation Bangladesh, is dedicated to achieve a healthy society by promoting an evidence-based public health system working in partnership with government and other stakeholders through research, health promotion, training, and technical assistance. So Public Health Foundation have excellent activities throughout the year. You can check www.phfbd.net. And at the same time, I want to mention that we have education and training, online support for young researchers. We have support for conducting surveys. We have an ethical review board. So definitely you can reach us for any kind of research support. We have an specific initiative for promoting health awareness events throughout the year and disseminating information, policy briefing. So please visit us in social media as well. Now, I want to introduce the I think she's one of the most prolific researcher of our time, and we are very proud that Dr. Barbara Gastel, who is a professor at Texas A&M University at the moment, with us today. So I want to give a warm welcome. And before that, I want to tell a little bit about Dr. Barbara. Dr. Barbara is a physician specializing in biomedical writing and editing. As I already mentioned, that is a professor of integrative bioscience, humanities in medicine and biotechnology at Texas A&M University, where she coordinates the master's degree program in science and technology journalism. Today, we'll be talking about manuscript writing and publication. Barbara has such an expertise, which I do believe is a great opportunity for us to learn from her. She has a BA from Yale, and an MD and MPH from Johns Hopkins University, After medical school, she did an American Association for the Advancement of Science, which is popularly known as AAAS, Mass Media Fellowship at Newsweek. I think she then worked in communication and administration at the National Institute of Health. She also was taught like science writing at MIT. So before joining Texas A&M faculty in 1989, she was assistant dean for teaching at the University of California, San Francisco School of Medicine. I want to mention that the book I read, Presenting Science to the Public, Teaching Science, is actually wrote by Barbara, and she written, I think, hundreds of articles and chapters on writing, editing, teaching, medical topics. For a decade, she edited the periodical of the Council of Science Editors. So we are extremely excited today to welcome Barbara to this event. And I think she deserves a big round of applause, which we'll do at the end of the session. But now, how are you, Barbara? How are you feeling to be with us today?
Thank you. I'm very honored to be with you today. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Barbara, for accepting the invitation. And I want to mention that today is already in Bangladesh, it's early morning, 22nd February, but I think in US it's 21st February till now. And it is International Mother Language Day, which, you know, is a big day for Bangladesh. So definitely it's a very special moment for us to invite you on such a special day for our country. So I don't want to take much of your time and want to, you know, open this floor for you. So Barbara, this floor is yours now, and we are eagerly waiting to hear on manuscript writing for publications, tips and resources. Barbara. Barbara, can you hear us? I think we are facing a technical difficulty for a couple of seconds. Okay, no problem. So in between, I definitely want to tell you a very, you know, a big opportunity for researchers. I think today will be a 1-hour session, but you are going to get an excellent opportunity for 3 days scientific manuscript writing for publication workshop, which is going to be hosted by Faith Bangladesh Public Health Foundation and McWeadon Education jointly. From 18th to 25th March, and it will be divided into 3 days, 18th, 20th, and 25th March, and you'll get a chance to register for this course application till 16th March, and it will be an online course by Zoom. And till Barbara gets back to us, I think I definitely want to take this opportunity to tell you all a little bit about the course. I think the course will give you an opportunity to explain principles, ethics, approaches, stepwise process and skills of scientific writing for publication. I want to stress on this because, you know, like being researchers, it is always a big challenge. Like we know how to conduct a research, we know how to do analysis, but at one point after doing all the research works, we are stuck like how to proceed next. So definitely it's going to give you a great idea about designing and drafting the scientific manuscript from a research report. So those who already did their masters in public health or any other masters or MD MPhil courses, you will get the chance to know how you can convert it to a manuscript and publish it in good journals. You can understand the process of submitting an article to a journal. So that is a huge part, like which journal to choose and which one will be most appropriate for your own work. Then you will be able to know how to appreciate reviewers' comments, as you'll definitely get those, and feedback and address response to the comments and identify best practices and ethics for scientific publication. It will be conducted by Dr. Tawfiq Jawdar, who is an international consultant at World Health Organization and also Executive Director of Public Health Foundation of Bangladesh. So Barbara, I think, is back, and definitely
yes, I'm sorry, I lost internet conductivity, but let me try to share my screen and we will then start. So we will be sharing the screen. And can you see my slides?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, thank you. And I apologize for it. And I am very happy to be here with you to talk with you about manuscript writing for journals, tips and resources. And I'm especially pleased to be talking with colleagues in Bangladesh. Some of you might recognize this view. This was during my first visit to Dhaka. It was taken from the Brack Center, and I've been to Dhaka 3 times and have had wonderful visits. So, and I hope to visit again in person, but for now, it's wonderful to join you this way. So first of all, an overview. This is actually a view out of my office window. First, we're going to talk about tips on advice. And I realize there will be later workshops that will go into more detail, but this will provide an overview. And then I will mention 3 more resources. And then at the end, I believe we'll have a little bit of time for questions and answers. So if you have questions, I would be delighted to try to answer them. And I believe that these slides will also be made available for people who are interested. So why don't we proceed with 12 tips on research writing. The first one is to write to communicate, not to impress. In scientific writing, the purpose is to share ideas and share information, not to show, what a wonderful writer you are or how much English you know, because people want the information and want it efficiently. So what's important? Good content is crucial. Good organization is crucial. And clear writing is crucial. What's not important is showing that you have a big vocabulary. Maybe an English course, that was important. In scientific writing, the important thing is to write clearly. Of course, to use the proper scientific terms, but otherwise to write in a simple, easy to understand way. What is sometimes said is that good scientific writing is largely invisible writing. In other words, people should notice the ideas, not the writing. And something to remember is many readers in other countries don't know much English. And almost every researcher is busy. So the considerate thing to do is to write simply so people can understand quickly without having to reread things many times. Tip 2 is to know the ethics. Really important to know and follow the ethics of scientific writing. One principle is authenticity. In other words, what you say has to be true. It can't be made up. Maybe you're aware there have been some scandals where people didn't do the research, but they wrote the papers. Clearly, it has to be real research. What you write also has to be accurate. Can't change the numbers. Also, can't be selective. You can't just say, well, I'll include the material that supports my hypothesis and get rid of the rest. So it has to be complete. The artwork, the drawings, the graphs, everything has to be accurate. And also, if you're publishing a scientific paper in a journal, it has to be original. Obviously, it can't be plagiarized. It also shouldn't be the same as another paper you wrote. So authenticity, accuracy, and originality are key. Another way it's sometimes put is you should avoid fabrication, falsification, or plagiarism. But there are other aspects of ethics to keep in mind too. One is credit. You need to give credit to people who did the work. The proper people need to be listed as authors. Also, if you are using, let's say, other people's ideas or words, you need to cite them. Also, need to treat human research subjects and animals in research ethically, and journals usually want evidence to that effect. Also, if you have conflicts of interest, need to disclose them. Let's say you are testing a drug and you own stock of the company that manufactures the drug. You need to say that. It will not disqualify your paper, but you need to be transparent. And also confidentiality can be important in ethics of publication. For example, if you are peer reviewing a paper, you need to keep it confidential. You can't talk about the paper with other people. Let me mention a really helpful book on research ethics called Doing Global Science. And it's really nice. This is openly accessible at the link that I've provided. You can download it. It's short, it's easy to read, and really an excellent book. A third tip is to make good use of libraries and writing centers. They're important for the background and context for the work. And often a really valuable resource is librarians. Librarians these days, they're not just the people who shelve the books, they're usually really experts on literature searching. And I have always found librarians to be really helpful. And another thing is university writing centers. They're in the United States and elsewhere, there are writing centers that have all kinds of online resources for writing, and many of them are openly accessible, and they share their online resources with everybody. And I've provided links to two very good ones. One of them is the University Writing Center here at Texas A&M University, where I teach. And another very good one is at Purdue University. And so I've provided that as well. Another tip is to make key decisions early, to decide things early so you don't get problems later. One thing is the author list. Try to decide before you write the paper, sometimes even early in the research, who is likely to be listed as an author in what order. And that can prevent arguments and disappointments later. I mean, clearly, sometimes things need to change later, but it's good to have an idea early. Another thing to decide on early is your top choice of journal to submit a paper to. That can be really helpful because that way you can gear your paper accordingly and follow the journal's instructions. So try to make decisions early, don't put them off. Speaking of instructions, another tip is to follow the instructions. I mean, surprisingly, this guideline's often ignored. I know when I talk to journal editors, they say a lot of people send in their papers and they're not even following the instructions. But really important for scientific papers. Also, if you're applying for grant proposals, very, very important. I know sometimes I've heard of grant proposals being rejected because people did not follow the instructions. And as you've probably seen, most journals post their instructions on their websites. In fact, if there's a journal you're thinking of and they don't have instructions, that often is a clue that it is not a good and valid journal. So look for the instructions and follow them. What I like to do is before I write a paper, I read the instructions. I'll often highlight the parts that are really important for me to remember. When I have questions while I'm writing, I check the instructions, and then I read the instructions one more time before I submit the paper, because very often there is something that I have forgotten. And I wanted to mention a really good resource in this regard if you're in the biomedical field. The Mulford Library at the University of Toledo in Ohio in the United States has a website that has thousands of links to thousands of journals, instructions to authors, and it's very, very convenient. Another suggestion is to use good models, to follow good models. Good scientific writing is largely a matter of imitation. So if you find some really good scientific papers in your field, you can sort of reverse engineer them and try to make yours similar to them. Doesn't mean plagiarizing them, but using them as models to follow. And so use them ones from your own target journal. And here are some things to notice. What kind of content do they have? How long are the papers? How are the different sections organized? How many tables and figures are they? And what kind do they have? Use of language. How technical is the language? What terms do they tend to use? And other things, for example, how do they do the references? Another tip is to organize the information carefully. Co-author I have worked with, Robert Day, whom I greatly respect, has stated the preparation of a scientific paper has less to do with literary skill than with organization. So basically, writing a scientific paper is a matter of organizing your information. And to me, spending time in organizing your information can save a lot of time later. I find if I don't organize things well, I am sort of in corners where I'm referring to something, but I haven't defined it yet. But if I plan everything out ahead of time, the paper almost writes itself. As we'll talk about later, the usual organization of a scientific paper is IMRAD, Introduction, Method, Results, and Discussion, or a variant of that. And later, we'll briefly discuss each section. Another suggestion is to set aside blocks of time for writing. I think most of us, if we say we're going to write when we have extra time, it will never happen. We're too busy for that. So we need to allocate time for writing. And I have to apologize a little bit about this illustration because this shows the US work week, which I realize is different from the work week in Bangladesh, but the idea is the same. So reserve times for writing. And one thing can be helpful is have a regular writing schedule. For example, let's say you have certain times of the week where you always have meetings or always teach or always see patients. Those are times you don't have, but look at your schedule, look at the times you have open and block out some of those as your writing times and save them and make it really an appointment with yourself. And if someone wants to do something else during the time, just say, sorry, I have a commitment, and save those times for writing. And it can be helpful in that regard to choose times that you tend to function best. I mean, some of us are morning people and we're best of all writing early in the morning. Others of us maybe are night people and tend to like to work late at night. So choose some times that you tend to function best and make those your writing times. Another tip is to keep your audience in mind. Think about your readers and think, what do the readers know? And connect what you say to what they know and build on their background. And also think about what do they care about and gear the writing to the reader's interests. And because readers of different journals can have different knowledge levels and different interests. So, and depending on the journal you choose, you may gear things a little bit differently. Let's say you've done some research, maybe some current research, let's say on COVID-19, maybe epidemiology of COVID-19. You might write your paper one way if you're sending it to an epidemiology journal, but another way if you're sending it to a clinical medicine journal, but still another way if you're sending it to a microbiology journal. So think about your audience. Another pointer is to write readably, write in a way that is easy to read, and people will be more likely to read it. So let me mention two things that generally should be avoided. One is very long paragraphs. They tend to be intimidating, hard to read. And another thing is very long sentences. And at least I find when I do my drafts, often my paragraphs are too long and my sentences are too long. And I mean, that's okay for a draft. But then when I go back, I need to revise and sometimes cut up my paragraphs and divide my sentences. Sometimes I find I'm trying to say 3 or 4 things at once, and I have parentheses within parentheses within parentheses. And I have to go back and say, okay, what am I trying to say? Let me say the first thing in one sentence, the second thing in another, and so forth. Especially for general readers, but also for other readers, consider using some other things that make writing easy to read. One is if you break things up with headings, it makes things easier. For some kinds of things, you can use bulleted lists or numbered lists. That makes it easier. Sometimes italics and boldface can call attention to important things, but of course, don't overuse these. And also graphics that are easy to understand can help. And let me now go on to say a little more about writing readably, about sort of simplifying language. And I find when I do a rough draft, I don't worry too much about that. I want to get my ideas down. But then when I go back and edit, it's really helpful to simplify the language. And this also can help if there are word limits. For example, often an abstract can be only maybe 250 words, and maybe my draft is 300. But if I do some of these things, I can condense it. So let's see what these are. One of them is where you can, when you revise, make it so it's simple common words. So instead of attempt, say try. Instead of fundamental, basic. Instead of utilize, use. Also, take out needless words, words that don't really do anything. Instead of saying red in color, say red. Or instead of totally destroyed, say destroyed. Condense wordy phrases too. Instead of saying at this point in time, say now. Or instead of in the event that, say if, just 2 letters. And also use verbs rather than nouns made for them. So maybe in my draft, I said produce relief of. When I revise it, I'll say relieve. Or instead of provide an explanation, I can say explain. And so we were mentioning revising, and another tip is to revise, revise, revise. Good writing generally is carefully revised writing, usually several times. And I think this is something that can help people relax about their writing, because it doesn't matter if the first draft is really bad. As long as you revise it to make it good, that's fine. And in fact, one story we had in one of my classes, the editor of the Journal of Clinical Investigation from a number of years ago came to talk. And he was known as just being a wonderful writer, and his papers almost always got accepted with very few revisions. And one of my students said, well, our professor says we need to revise our papers. Do you revise your papers before you submit them? And he said, well, if I'm lucky, only 10 times. That's probably why he was known as such a great writer. And in revising, make good use of feedback from other people. Show your draft to other people, get their suggestions. And let me mention a resource. I wrote an article called Editing and Proofreading Your Own Work, and I've provided a link to it in case you'd like to use it. And the 12th tip is to view peer reviewers and editors as your allies. I think sometimes people think, well, they're the enemy, that they're trying to reject your paper. But peer reviewers want to get good papers. They're a source of advice to editors. They are also a source of mentorship for authors and often have many good constructive suggestions. And some of the best authors I know keep a list of the suggestions they've gotten from peer reviewers so that in the future they can keep following them. And same thing, editors, your goal and theirs, it's the same goal. It's to publish an excellent paper. And you should work together to overcome barriers. So, for example, if there's some suggestions for revision and don't really agree with them and you think of a better way to revise it, tell the editor and you can work together. So those were 12 suggestions. Hope those were helpful. And these are some wildflowers here in Texas. Let's take a breath, and then we will move on to the rest of our presentation, which is some section by section tips on writing scientific papers. And as I mentioned, a common format for journal articles is IMRAD, with introduction, sort of what was the question, methods, how did you try to answer it, results, what did you find, and discussion, what does it mean? So basically paper answering those 4 questions. And of course, a more complete view, you'd have title, authors, and abstract, and then introduction, methods, results, and discussion, probably acknowledgements, and then references. So why don't we go through these briefly, one at a time, with some tips for each. One good way to define the title is the fewest possible words that adequately indicate the contents of the paper. So it needs to be informative, but also as short as possible. Titles are really important because people use them so much in literature searching. A title shouldn't have extra words, so it shouldn't start out by saying a study of or observations on, because people know that if it's published as a research article in a journal, that's what it is. Of course, should be specific enough. In general, titles shouldn't include abbreviations because it can be confusing. Some journals allow some very common abbreviations, but overall, abbreviations should be avoided. And sometimes the instructions to authors will also ask you to provide a running title. And sometimes people wonder, well, what's a running title? A running title is a short version of the title, and it appears normally at the tops of the pages in the journal article. Authors. Basically, the authors, of course, are the people with important intellectual contributions to the work. In many fields, they're listed starting with the biggest contributions and then going down to the smaller contributions. An exception is that in some fields, the head of the research group commonly is listed last, and so that's a position of honor too. One thing that's helpful is to list your name the same way on every paper, because then it makes it clear that you have it's the same author. And I wanted to mention some resources on authorship. One, the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors has recommendations for who should qualify for authorship and some other aspects of authorship, and I've provided a link for that. Also, there's now something called credit, which lists the different kinds of contributors to papers. And also, some of you may have an ORCID, which is a researcher identification number. If you don't have one, I have the link, and you can register for one. It's very easy. This is really nice because this way, each researcher who registers has their own number. So let's say maybe you have a common name and there's several researchers with the same name. Well, if you have the unique number, people can check and make sure it's you, or if your name changes. So it's really very convenient. And I'm finding that more and more journals are actually requiring authors to provide their ORCID identifier. The abstract, I am mentioning it now, but I should mention that it's often helpful to either write it after the whole paper or revise it after the whole paper, because it should really summarize the whole paper. And I have an image of a diamond here because the abstract should be like a little gem. It's a really important part of the paper because it's probably, other than the title, the most widely read part. And people use it to decide whether to read the rest of the paper. Also, something important is it gives editors and reviewers and other people their first impression of the paper. It should briefly summarize the paper and normally should be organized like the paper. For example, in sort of a mini IMRAD format with maybe a sentence or so of introduction, a very brief summary of the methods, a statement of the main findings, and a statement of the main conclusions. And many journals actually use structured abstracts with standard headings. For example, background, method, results, conclusions. And that makes it easy for authors to provide the information and for readers to find the information. And I find if I'm writing for a journal that doesn't have structured abstracts, often for my draft, I'll do a structured abstract to make sure everything's there. And then I can just take out the headings and I have a conventional abstract. And so abstract, really important. Give it the attention it deserves. How about the introduction to the paper? What should it do? It should provide background information. And you may recall earlier we talked about different papers have different audiences. So depending on the audience, the introduction may be, for example, more detailed or less detailed, or more technical or less technical. And it should identify, what was your research question or your hypothesis or the objective of the research? So people, after reading the introduction, should know what you were trying to find out. And as we said, it should be geared to the audience. A common structure is like a funnel. In other words, starting broad and going narrow. So starting with general information on why this topic is important. Then presenting highlights of relevant previous research. Then identifying one or more gaps in knowledge that you are trying to fill through the research. And then finally, briefly stating the approach that you used. So in other words, starting with the broad subject matter, narrowing down to previous research, and narrowing it down further to your own research. And so this just funnels people right into your paper. And then the methods section logically follows from that. And the purposes here, a couple of main purposes. One is to allow others to replicate the research or to use the same methods in similar research. And another purpose is to allow other people to evaluate the research. They may not be doing the research themselves, but by reading the methods, they can it helps them see if the research is valid, or, for example, how much the findings can be generalized. In general, the method section should start with an overview of the general study design, and it should identify things such as population studied or organisms studied, reagents or drugs or chemicals used, equipment, statistical methods, all those kinds of things go there. Often, this is also the place, if you were doing research on human participants or on animals, this is the place where you would state that, for example, that the institutional review board approved your research. And method section should be written in past tense because it happened in the past. It should not be written, for example, in the form of instructions. And in some cases, you can include subheads or figures or tables, and that can often make the method section easier to follow. The results section, it's really the core of the paper. Clearly, if you have no results, no paper. And the results section should summarize your findings, state the main findings, not provide data in very great detail. It shouldn't just be like a dump of everything from a lab notebook. And in some journals, if you have additional data or more detailed data, some journals will have online supplements where you can provide it. Of course, the results section often includes figures or tables or both. And the text of the results section should mention each table and figure. And the text should present the highlights of the tables and figures, but it shouldn't repeat all the content in detail. And the results section normally should present results, but not comment on them, because the place to comment on them is the next section we'll discuss, which is the discussion section. Often, the discussion section should start with a brief summary of the main findings. And there are a couple of reasons for this, even though it's a little repetitive of the results. One is it reminds people of what will be discussed. The other reason is not everybody reads a paper from beginning to end. Some people skip around and some people go straight to the discussion. And this summary will orient the people who proceed in this way. The discussion should answer the questions stated in the introduction, or if you, let's say, had a hypothesis, say whether it was supported. And here is some other common content. A good discussion will show how, for example, your findings relate to the findings of other research. I think one thing that often distinguishes research by a beginning student and by a mature researcher is the mature researcher can really put the research into the context of the field. Often the discussion should talk about the implications of the research. And if there are practical applications, talk about them. Discussion is also a place to identify strengths and limitations of the research and needs for further research. Generally, the discussion should move from specific to general, sort of like an upside down or inverted funnel. So it's sort of the opposite from the introduction. Introduction started general and ended with your own research, and discussion the opposite, starting narrow with your own research and then broadening out to show how it fits into the field and perhaps into the world in general. And in some papers or some journals, the discussion is followed by a conclusion section, but in other journals, there's just a concluding paragraph of the discussion that sums things up. So in other words, the overall structure of a paper is sort of like an hourglass. It starts broad and general, then it narrows down and focuses on your own research, and then gets wider again, putting the research in broader context. Some papers also will have acknowledgments at the end, and this is a place to thank people who contributed to the research, but whose contributions don't qualify them for authorship. So maybe, let's say I have a lab with great equipment, and I let you use the great equipment in my lab. That doesn't make me an author, but the nice thing to do would be to thank me for that. Or maybe I edited your paper and you appreciate the fact that I edited the paper, but that doesn't make me an author. But the nice thing to do and the transparent thing to do is to thank me in the acknowledgments. It's good to ask people's permission before listing them. Usually people are pleased to be listed, but for example, if they don't agree with your interpretation or for other reasons, they may not want to be listed. This is also a good chance to ask people how they would like their names to appear. And sometimes the acknowledgments is a place to mention sources of financial support. Normally, when you publish a paper, there's a requirement that you state who, if anyone, funded the research, for example, a foundation or a government agency. And some journals will put it in the acknowledgments. Others will, for example, put it in a footnote. And then, of course, references at the end. They're important for giving credit, for adding credibility to your work, to show you the relationship to previous work, and to help readers find further information. Obviously, they need to be accurate to fulfill these roles. There have been studies showing that they often have errors in them, but really important that they be accurate. And they should include only things you've read, things that you've actually obtained and looked at. Sometimes people will cite things that, someone else has cited, but it turns out often other people will cite things inaccurately or misinterpret what's in them. So good to look at things yourself before you cite them. Just a reminder to use the reference format that your target journal requests. And a resource is citation management software. Maybe some of you use software such as EndNote or Zotero, and that can make citation management easier. But it's certainly very possible to do a good job without as well. And so before we move into our last segment with about 3 more references, another pause to look at some Texas wildflowers. Hope this rundown on journal writing was helpful. And this is a view here right on campus at Texas A&M University, taken last March by my husband. So let me mention 3 more resources that I think are really helpful and that maybe you would like to bookmark. One of them is called OneLook Dictionary Search. Maybe some of you has used it. And I really like it because I can search for a word and look it up in multiple dictionaries at once. Because I find sometimes looking in one dictionary, it's not really clear. I don't get a full sense of it, but by looking in several dictionaries, I can get a real understanding. So I use OneLook a lot. Another resource that I like a lot is called Academic Phrase Bank. And this is a British resource. And this has phrases that can be used in different parts of a paper. And so if you sort of know what you want to say, but can't quite think of the right words, you can search there. And because these are common phrases, using them isn't plagiarism. So for example, let's say there was something, you did some research and you found one of the findings was unexpected. And you're thinking, well, how can I say this? Well, you can search under discussing findings, and there's a section on unexpected findings, and they list several ways that you could state it. So I really like this. And another resource, sort of a meta resource, is AuthorAID. And this is a project that I worked closely with for several years. This is a resource for researchers, largely to help them write about and publish their work. And they have free online courses and a blog and other materials. And in the current context, probably the most relevant thing is the AuthorAID resource library. And this has many PowerPoint presentations, articles, other materials on topics such as writing scientific papers, writing grant proposals, and such. And so recommend looking at this resource as well. And so that was a quick rundown, some tips and resources. I hope this has been helpful. In a moment, I think we will go to questions and answers. But finally, this is a picture taken at my university and part of the university where I work. And I want to thank you and wish you all the best. And so now I will hide my slides and return to the main session.
Thank you very much, Barbara. It was such an useful session. I think it is very, very informative, insightful, and I think our audience, I think I'm receiving many comments of appreciation. So thank you so much. I think we should directly jump to the Q&A session. The first question is there any frequency for keeping the writing time aside? Daily, weekly, fortnightly, any particular suggestion regarding weekends? Should we keep the writing time during weekends or weekdays, or it doesn't matter in your opinion or experience? So this question came from Tawfiq Jordar, who is the current of Public Foundation.
Great question. Yeah. So, any frequency, should be daily or weekly? And studies show that different things work for different people. I know there's some people who say you've got to write every day, and other people not. So I would say, and studies bear this out, find a way that works for you. What doesn't work, according to the studies, is not having any system. But there are some people, I know I have a colleague, she loves to write for half an hour every morning. That works for her. For me, that doesn't work. I'm much better, let's say, setting aside 2 or 3 hours on a weekend and doing that. Or I'm more a night person, when everything in the house quiets down about 10 at night, if I can write for. So I would say, figure out what works for you and go with that. And don't worry if other people criticize you and say, that's not the way to do it. Do what works for you.
Excellent. He asked, you can see the question here, should we mention the type of study in the title? So it's a very technical one.
Right, that's a very good one. Yeah, should you mention the type of study in the title? I think that is often helpful, but I think it varies among the kinds of journals. For example, there are some journals that, let's say, if it's a clinical trial, it should be mentioned. But then there's some other kinds of studies that it doesn't. So I think this is a good thing to do in this regard. One is look at your journal's instructions to authors, because sometimes they will say, and also look at other titles in the same journal, and you can see if there's a trend in that way. Thank you. Great question.
Thank you so much, Barbara. Professor Sharmin Yasmin asked, some journals want practice points. Is it essential? Would you please talk on it?
Right, yes. I think this varies from journal to journal. And I think if the journal requests it, then you should certainly provide it. I think often some of the more applied journals, let's say for clinicians, will want that. So I think it's a good idea. Just follow what the journal says, and again, use good models. See how they do the practice points in that journal if you have them.
Great. So we had a couple of, pre-scheduled questions from some of the young researchers. So one of them asked about corresponding authors. Say, like recently, they have seen like 2 or 3 corresponding authors in one paper. What is your take on that? Like, it should be one, or having 2 or 3 corresponding authors makes any sense?
Right, good question. Having 2 or 3 corresponding authors, because for our very beginning researchers who may not be familiar with corresponding authors are usually the ones that the journal should contact about the paper, or that readers should contact the paper. And the reason of having a corresponding author, let's say if there are multiple authors, is so they know which to. So I think it often can be confusing to have multiple corresponding authors, and many journals just want one. Some journals, sometimes it makes sense, let's say, to have 2. Let's say one of the authors travels a lot, or maybe does a lot of surgery. It can't sometimes read. So, or is pregnant or something like that. So some cases it can, but I think sometimes people want multiple because some people feel that it's an honor to be the corresponding author and they want lots of people to be honored. But I think it's not often very practical to have, let's say, more than 2. So I would, again, check the journal's instructions to authors and follow them.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I think another question I had, it's related to native speakers. So one of the young researchers asked, some journals asked for, can you please check with your manuscript by a native speaker? And it is often difficult for a researcher from, a country like Bangladesh or low resource settings where English is not our native language. So in that case, what should be the ideal method of doing it? Should we ask to the journal, or we should, wait for a certain time to get it reviewed by someone else? So it's a very, very technical issue for us to get a native speaker. So what is your thought on that and how to solve this?
Yeah, I sort of get angry when they ask for a native speaker, because to me, the important thing is that the person have full English proficiency. And there are many native speakers who cannot write well enough to write a paper for a journal. And there are many non-native speakers, including some I know in Bangladesh, who have superb English. So if I were a journal editor and something was not very well written, I think I would say, please have it reviewed by someone with full English proficiency. And so I think that's the important thing, to find someone with native level English proficiency, but it doesn't have to be a native speaker. It should just be someone with a superb command of English. And ideally, for a journal article, someone who understands the subject matter too, because it's not just a matter of grammar. But I think it's a challenge. I think the funniest thing was once in that regard, one of my students, this was something by a non-native English speaker, but who had very good English. And her paper was first edited by one of my students, who was very good. And then I edited it. But the person had a name that sounded like the name not of an English speaker. So the author got back they told it got back a peer review. And the peer review said, please have it edited by a native speaker. And it had already been edited by 2 native speakers.
Thank you so much. So definitely it's a a good suggestion. Like we can get back to them by saying like it is being edited by a Bangladeshi researcher with excellent proficiency in English. So thank you so much. It's an excellent idea, Barbara. So another anonymous question, and I think it's very interesting. One young researcher, I think, he said like, if I'm not happy with the author order, and the first author and the senior author is my supervisor or boss, how to express my dissatisfaction with the author order to the journal? Should I write to them, or I don't know how to solve this? So it's a very tricky question, I think.
Yeah, author order is really tricky, particularly when you're dealing with, I think, a situation where there are hierarchies. And I think once it's initially determined, hard to change it. And I think if one contacts the journal will say that it's up to the authors to say. So I think for, if it's decided for the paper, maybe if you're going to be doing more papers together, you could raise it and say, can we talk about, taking turns being authors for other papers? I know in some research group, that's what they do. They take turns because they all have major roles. And so they take turns being first author. And so maybe could talk about, the possibility of doing that.
Thank you so much. And I think we are getting many, many appreciation posts from many, senior researchers at the moment. So this is the last question. It's from me, Barbara. It's about rejection and subsequent editing. Like we often, receive multiple rejections. So should we edit after each rejection? Or should we wait for a certain time? Like, okay, it depends on, sometimes we go with impact factors. Like I'll go with 8, then I'll go for 6, I'll go for 4 or 3, something like that. Sometimes we change journals. So what is your take on rejection and subsequent editing? If we are not getting any, review and comments for the rejection, the journal, maybe they are saying, oh, we are rejecting it without giving any substantial comment. So should we just submit it as it is to the next journal, or we should change it with consultation and then we should go for the next journal?
I think it really depends on the kind of journal. I mean, if, again, looking at the instructions to authors, because different journals have different instructions. So I'd certainly look at the second journal's instructions to authors, make sure it's fit. And also, is it the same kind of journal? For example, let's say you have something about research on heart disease, and you think that everybody's going to be really interested in it. So you send it to Science or Nature or something like that. And it gets, it's rejected right away. And then you think, well, maybe a general medical journal. Maybe I'll try, JAMA or BMJ or something like that. Well, then you'd probably want to rewrite it to appeal to doctors. And then let's say it doesn't get in. And then you think, well, it's a good paper, but it really isn't of really wide interest. It really belongs in a cardiology journal. And again, we'd probably have to rewrite it to appeal specifically to cardiologists. And at that point, maybe you get your acceptance, and being accepted by a good specialty journal is great too.
Absolutely. So rejection is not bad always. So I should convey this to my juniors, like rejection is sometimes good. So thank you so much.
Right. Yeah. And if you're never rejected, it means you are aiming too low. It's sort of like, if you're an athlete, if you win every time, it means you're not playing good enough opponents.
Perfect. I think that is my take point for today. Thank you so much, Professor Barbara. We are just at the end of our session. It's already 10:34 here. So we are 5 minutes, already we crossed that. So thank you again. It was such a great session, I must say. We learned a lot, and it is a big honor for us to have you for today's session. Definitely, we're expecting that we'll get you again and again and learn from you. And to all the audience those who are listening to us at the moment, we are going to organize a scientific manuscript writing for publication workshop from 18 to 25 March, not 18 to 25, 18, 20, and 25. So it's a 3 days workshop, and you can visit faithbangladesh.org for detail of the workshop. So thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Faith. Thank you, all the associated organizations, definitely Public Foundation Bangladesh and Dr. Botul Khan for creating this excellent platform. And I definitely want to thank Dr. Aftabuddin Ahmed sir, Dr. Rafiq Bhai, who is technically supporting us, Professor Sharmi Yasmin ma'am, Dr. Tawfiq Jodar Bhai, and the whole team for organizing it. Thank you so much. Have a nice day. Goodbye.
Thank you all. All the best to you.
Thank you.